Simple young woman tells paralyzed billionaire, there are still good women out there. In a world where trust is hard to come by, one simple woman's words challenged a paralyzed billionaire's view on love. When he said, all women are bad people, she looked him in the eye and boldly responded, Sir, there are still good women out there. Her honesty ignited a spark in him, one he never expected. What started as a simple confrontation turned into a life-changing journey, filled with passion, doubt, and ultimately a love that defied all odds. Today, I want to share this incredible story with you, my beautiful story family. But before we begin, let me say something very personal to me. As we continue to make these videos, we put in a lot of effort hoping they reach and inspire many people. One of my biggest goals is to show the value of love, humility, and kindness, and how these qualities can make the world a better place. I would love to know where you're watching from, so please share it in the comments below. I'm so grateful for every single one of you, and I can't wait to connect with all of you as we continue to grow this amazing community. Now, let's dive into today's story. I promise you it's going to be full of twists, tension, and a love story you'll never forget. Sebastian King sat at the head of a sleek mahogany table in the private dining room of La Lumière, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't even bother with a public menu. The walls gleamed with polished wood and soft golden light, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers overhead. His colleagues, 3 men in tailored suits, each nursing a glass of overpriced bourbon, leaned back in their chairs, laughing at some half-hearted joke about mergers and market shares. Sebastian didn't laugh. His wheelchair hummed faintly as he adjusted his position, his sharp gray eyes scanning the room with a restlessness that never seemed to fade. His hands, though steady, gripped the armrests a little too tightly, betraying the storm beneath his polished exterior. I'm telling you, he said, cutting through their chatter like a blade, all women are the same. They're only after money or status. You give them an inch, and they'll take your soul along with your bank account. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned this lesson the hard way, each word dripping with a cynicism that had calcified over years of betrayal. The men around him shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, but none dared challenge him. Not Sebastian King, the man who'd turned a crumbling tech empire into a billion-dollar juggernaut, even after the accident that stole his legs and his trust. The faint clink of a glass being set down drew his attention to the far corner of the room. A woman stood there, her caramel skin glowing softly under the warm lights, her posture unassuming yet commanding. She wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but the way she carried herself made it clear she didn't need extravagance to stand out. Amara had been clearing a nearby table, her movements efficient but not rushed, when Sebastian's words sliced through the air. She paused, her dark eyes narrowing slightly, and then she turned toward him, stepping closer with a boldness that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge that demanded attention, "but you're wrong. There are still good women out there. Not everyone's chasing what you think they are." Her words hung there, sharp and unapologetic, cutting through the haze of cigar smoke and privilege. The colleagues froze, their eyes darting between her and Sebastian, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But Sebastian didn't snap. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that bordered on fascination. Her confidence wasn't loud or performative. It was raw, unpolished, like a flame flickering in a storm. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone low, almost a challenge. But there was something else there, too, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even hope, buried beneath layers of skepticism. Amara didn't flinch. Just someone who's tired of hearing generalizations thrown around like they're gospel. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned on her heel, her footsteps soft but deliberate as she walked back towards the kitchen. The sway of her dress left a faint impression in the air, and Sebastian found himself staring after her, his mind racing in a way it hadn't in years. "Sebastian, you all right?" One of his colleagues, a wiry man named Paul, ventured cautiously, swirling his bourbon. "She's got some nerve, huh?" "She's got something," Sebastian murmured, more to himself than to Paul. His fingers tapped the armrest of his chair, a restless rhythm that mirrored the questions swirling in his head. Who was she? Why did she care enough to speak up? And why, after all this time, did her words stick with him like a splinter under his skin? The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. His colleagues droned on about quarterly projections and stock options, but Sebastian's attention kept drifting. He replayed her voice in his mind. There are still good women out there, and felt an unfamiliar tug, a mix of irritation and intrigue. He'd spent years building walls around himself, brick by bitter brick, after Elena. The memory of her still stung, her tear-streaked face as she confessed she'd only stayed for the lifestyle, the way she'd walked out without looking back. He'd vowed never to let anyone close again, convinced every smile hid an agenda. But this woman, this stranger, had stormed past his defenses with a single sentence. As the waiter cleared the plates, Sebastian made a decision. "Paul," he said abruptly, interrupting a rant about tax loopholes, "find out who she is, discreetly." Paul raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You sure?" "She's just some waitress." "She's not just anything," Sebastian cut in, his voice firm. "Do it." The next hour stretched out as Sebastian waited, his mind a battlefield of doubt and curiosity. He barely touched his dessert, a delicate chocolate mousse that sat melting in front of him, his focus entirely on the door Amara had disappeared through. When Paul finally returned, slipping back into his seat with a sly grin, Sebastian's pulse quickened. "Her name's Amara Jackson," Paul said, keeping his voice low. "Works here part-time, lives downtown. No record, no red flags. Just a regular woman, far as I can tell." "Regular," Sebastian echoed, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. There was nothing regular about the way she'd looked at him, unflinching, like she could see straight through his armor. He leaned back, his jaw tightening. "I want to talk to her again." Paul smirked. "What, you're gonna roll up to her table and ask her out? After she basically called you out in front of everyone?" "No," Sebastian said, his eyes narrowing. "I'm going to find out if she meant what she said." The night wore on, but Amara didn't reappear. Sebastian's frustration grew with every passing minute, a restless energy he couldn't shake. He didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, yet her words had lodged themselves in his chest, refusing to let go. As his driver pulled the sleek black SUV around to the restaurant's entrance, Sebastian glanced out the tinted window, half hoping to catch a glimpse of her. The street was empty, the city lights glinting off the wet pavement like scattered stars. Back at his penthouse, high above the city skyline, Sebastian couldn't sleep. The hum of the elevator, the faint buzz of the smart home system adjusting the lights. None of it drowned out the echo of her voice. He maneuvered his chair to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sprawling lights below. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, a crack in the foundation he'd built so carefully. He didn't trust it, didn't want it, but it was there all the same. The next morning, he called Paul. "Get me her schedule," he said, his tone clipped. "I'm not done with this." "You're serious about this?" Paul asked, incredulous. "She's not some puzzle to solve, Seb." "Maybe not," Sebastian replied, his voice hardening. "But I need to know why she said it, and if she's lying." Paul sighed. "All right, I'll see what I can do. But don't say I didn't warn you. This could get messy." "Let it," Sebastian said, ending the call. He leaned back, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Amara Jackson had walked into his world uninvited, and now he couldn't let her walk out without answers. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't yet see, was that this was only the beginning, that her simple defiance would pull him into a storm he wasn't prepared for, one that would test everything he thought he knew about trust, about women, about himself. 2 days later, Paul delivered. "She's working tomorrow night, same place." "You sure you want to go back there?" Sebastian didn't hesitate. "Yes." The following evening he returned to La Lumière, his heart pounding in a way that felt foreign and alive. The restaurant buzzed with the usual crowd, wealthy patrons, clinking glasses, murmured deals, but all he saw was the empty space where she'd stood before. He waited, his patience fraying, until finally she emerged from the kitchen, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, like she sensed something in the air. "Miss Jackson," he called out as she passed his table, his voice carrying just enough authority to stop her in her tracks. She turned, her brow lifting slightly. "You again?" "Me again," he said, meeting her gaze. "You left before I could ask you something." "And what's that?" she asked, crossing her arms, her tone wary but curious. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Did you mean it? What you said about good women?" Amara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, not warmly but with a quiet defiance that sent a shiver through him. "Why don't you stick around and find out?" Before he could respond, she walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. And as the night stretched on, Sebastian King realized he was hooked, not just on her words, but on the mystery of her, a woman who'd dared to challenge the fortress of his cynicism with nothing but her own unyielding truth. Sebastian watched Amara disappear into the hum of the restaurant, her parting words looping in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. Stick around and find out. It wasn't just her defiance that gnawed at him. It was the way she'd said it, with a quiet strength that felt like a dare. He spent the rest of the night at the table, nursing a glass of untouched scotch, his colleagues' chatter fading into static. By the time he left, the city lights blurring past his tinted windows, he knew he couldn't let it end there. She'd sparked something in him, anger, curiosity, maybe even a sliver of hope, and he needed to understand why. The next few days were a blur of restless energy. At his penthouse, surrounded by sleek marble and glass, Sebastian found himself distracted, his usual focus splintering. Meetings dragged on, numbers on spreadsheets blurred, and every conversation felt like noise. He kept seeing her face, those dark, unflinching eyes, that subtle curve of her lips when she'd smiled. He hated how much space she'd taken up in his head, hated that he cared. But he did, and that was enough to push him into action. "Paul," he said into his phone one morning, his voice sharp as he stared out at the skyline, "I need more than her schedule. I need to meet this woman. Find a way." Paul's sigh crackled through the line. "You're not letting this go, are you? All right, give me a day. But Seb, she's not some project you can dissect." "She's not a project," Sebastian snapped, though the words felt hollow even to him. "She's something else. Just do it." While Sebastian's world churned with determination, Amara's was a different kind of chaos. Downtown, in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a flickering light bulb, she sat at a wobbly kitchen table, bills spread out like a losing hand of cards. Her second job at a diner had cut her hours, and the restaurant gig barely covered rent. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion tugging at her bones, but her jaw stayed set, resolute. She'd been here before, scraping by, juggling shifts, refusing to break. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Lila. "You okay? You look like you're carrying the world again." Amara typed back a quick, "I'm fine," but her fingers hesitated over the keys. She wasn't fine. She was tired. Tired of the grind. Tired of proving herself to a world that didn't care. Back in his high-rise office, Sebastian paced, or rather, wheeled, restlessly, his chair humming against the polished floor. Paul strode in, a tablet in hand, his expression a mix of amusement and caution. "Got something for you. Amara Jackson. Lives in a rough part of town, works 2 jobs, no family money. She's clean, Seb. No skeletons, no scams. Just a woman trying to keep her head above water." Sebastian's brow furrowed. 2 jobs? "Yeah. Waitress at La Lumiere and a diner on 5th. She's not exactly living the high life." Sebastian leaned back, processing. It didn't fit. Her confidence, her poise, clashing with a life stretched thin. "I want her here," he said finally. "Offer her a job, personal assistant, something that gets her close." Paul blinked. "You're kidding. You don't even know her." "I know enough," Sebastian shot back, his voice firm. "Make it happen." Across town, Amara was wiping down tables at the diner when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. Her tone clipped. "Yeah? Miss Jackson." The voice was smooth, professional. "My name's Paul Carter. I work for Sebastian King. He'd like to offer you a position. Personal assistant. Full-time, good pay, benefits. Interested?" Amara froze, a damp rag dangling from her hand. "Sebastian King? The guy from the restaurant?" "The same. He was impressed by you." She laughed, short and sharp. "Impressed? I called him out. What's this really about?" Paul hesitated, then said, "He wants to know who you are." This is his way of finding out. "Look, the offer's real. You'd start next week if you say yes." Amara's mind raced. The money could change everything. No more double shifts. No more late-night walks home in the dark. But Sebastian King? The bitter billionaire in the wheelchair with his cold eyes and sharper tongue? She didn't trust it. Didn't trust him. Yet the weight of those bills, the exhaustion in her bones, pressed down hard. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Give me a day." "Fair enough," Paul replied. "I'll call tomorrow." She hung up, staring at the cracked linoleum floor. A lifeline dangled in front of her, but it came with strings, strings tied to a man who saw the world through a lens of distrust. She didn't know if she was stepping into opportunity or a trap, but as she finished her shift, the question lingered. Could she afford to say no? The next day, Paul relayed her response to Sebastian. "She's on the fence," he said, leaning against the desk. "You spooked her, I think." "Good," Sebastian replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Let her stew. She'll come around." And she did. That evening, Amara called back. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "I'll take it. But tell him this. I'm not here to play games." Paul grinned as he passed the message along. "She's in, Seb. Starts Monday." Sebastian nodded, satisfaction settling over him like a rare calm. "Good. Let's see what she's made of." Monday arrived, and Amara stepped into Sebastian's world, a towering glass building that felt more like a fortress than an office. She wore a simple blazer and slacks, her chin high despite the nerves twisting her gut. The receptionist led her to a private elevator, and when the doors opened, there he was, Sebastian King, waiting, his gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Jackson," he said, his tone smooth but edged with something she couldn't place. "Welcome." "Mr. King," she replied, matching his coolness, "let's get one thing straight. I'm here to work, not to prove anything to you." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. "We'll see about that." And with that, the dance began. Two guarded souls circling each other, each hiding wounds and secrets, neither ready to yield. What neither of them knew yet was how deep this would go, how Amara's presence would stir shadows in Sebastian's past, and how his pursuit would unearth truths she'd buried long ago. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than either could imagine. Amara's first week working for Sebastian King was a tightrope walk over a chasm of tension. The glass and steel fortress of his office buzzed with efficiency, assistants darting between desks, screens flickering with data, phones humming with the pulse of a billion-dollar empire. Yet Sebastian's corner of the world felt isolated, a quiet throne where he ruled with a steady hand and a guarded heart. Amara shadowed him, her notepad filled with schedules and cryptic notes, her eyes sharp as she observed the man behind the myth. He was precise, demanding, his voice cutting through the air like a whip when someone faltered. But beneath it, she caught glimpses, his jaw tightening when he thought no one was looking, his fingers drumming restlessly on the armrests of his chair. He was a fortress, too, one built not just of wealth but of something heavier, something unspoken. Their exchanges were clipped, professional. "Meeting with the board at 10, she'd say, handing him a folder. "Don't be late," he'd reply, his tone dry but his eyes lingering a fraction too long. She didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't soften her edges to please him. It drove him mad, and drew him in deeper. By Friday, he'd made up his mind. The office wasn't enough. He needed to see her in his space, on his terms. "Miss Jackson," he said as she packed up her things, her blazer slung over one arm, "I'd like you to come to my home tomorrow. There's a project I need your input on. Paul will arrange the car." Amara paused, her dark eyes narrowing. "Your home? Why not here?" "Because I said so," he replied, his voice smooth but firm, testing her. She didn't argue, just nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Fine. What time?" 9. "Don't be late." She wasn't. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment, the driver holding the door as she slid in, her stomach knotting despite her calm exterior. The drive wound through the city, past gleaming towers and into the hills, where the air grew cooler and the houses sprawled into estates. Sebastian's mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling marvel of stone and glass, perched like a king's castle overlooking the chaos below. The gates swung open silently, and Amara stepped out, her boots clicking against the cobblestone as she took it all in. It was beautiful, yes, but cold. Like him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and leather. A housekeeper led her through a maze of halls, past walls lined with art she didn't recognize, to a vast study where Sebastian waited. He sat by a massive window, the morning light framing him, his wheelchair a silent extension of his presence. The room was all dark wood and high ceilings, bookshelves stretching to the sky, a fireplace crackling despite the warmth outside. He didn't turn as she entered, but she felt his awareness, the way the air shifted when she stepped closer. "Miss Jackson," he said finally, his voice low, resonant. "Sit." She didn't. "I'd rather stand, thanks. What's this project?" He turned then, his gray eyes locking onto hers, sharp and unyielding. "Patience. We'll get to that. First, tell me, what do you think of all this?" He gestured vaguely, toward the room, the house, the empire he'd built. Amara crossed her arms, her posture relaxed but her gaze steady. "It's impressive, but it's just stuff. Doesn't tell me anything about you." His brow arched, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he masked it. "Most people see the wealth and assume they know everything." "I'm not most people," she said simply, and there it was again, that quiet defiance, the spark that had hooked him from the start. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the armrests. No, you're not. Which is why you're here. I've been watching you this week. You're sharp, efficient, but you don't bend. Why is that? She tilted her head, studying him. I don't see the point in bending for someone who hasn't earned it. You're my boss, not my king. A laugh escaped him, short and rough, like he hadn't meant to let it out. Fair enough. Let's see if I can earn it then. He gestured to a chair across from him, his tone softening just enough to intrigue her. This time she sat, crossing her legs, waiting. For the next hour they talked about the project, a vague plan to streamline his personal schedule, but it quickly veered into something else. He tested her, probing with questions about her life, her choices. Why 2 jobs? He asked at one point, his voice casual but his eyes intent. Necessity, she said, unflinching. Not everyone's born with a silver spoon. He didn't flinch either. I wasn't. I built this from nothing. After the accident, I had to rebuild it all over again. She nodded, filing that away. That explains the chip on your shoulder. He smirked, leaning back. And what's your excuse? Life, she said, her tone dry but her eyes flashing with something raw. It's not kind to everyone. The conversation danced like that, push and pull, each peeling back a layer without giving too much away. She saw the man beneath the billionaire, the frustration in his clenched jaw, the flicker of pain when he shifted in his chair. He saw her resilience, the way she held herself like someone who'd fought for every inch she stood on. By noon, the housekeeper brought coffee, and they paused, the silence thick with unspoken questions. You're not what I expected, he said finally, setting his cup down, his gaze piercing. What did you expect? She asked, sipping hers, unfazed. Someone softer. Someone who'd fawn over the house. The money. You don't. I don't believe in fairy tales, Mr. King, she said, her voice steady, cutting through his charm like a blade. Money doesn't make you a prince. It just makes you rich. He stared at her, stunned. No one talked to him like that, not his colleagues, not his ex, not the endless parade of people who'd kissed his ring for a scrap of his favor. Her words hit like a slap, but instead of anger, he felt a rush. Admiration, sharp and unexpected. She wasn't afraid of him, wasn't dazzled by him. She saw him and she didn't blink. You're bold, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Most people wouldn't dare. Most people don't work 2 jobs to pay rent, she shot back, her lips curving slightly, not a smile but a challenge. I don't have time to be scared of you. He laughed again, longer this time, the sound echoing off the walls. You're something else, Amara Jackson. So are you, she said, her tone softening just enough to catch him off guard. But I'm still figuring out what. The rest of the day unfolded in a strange rhythm. They worked, actually worked, sorting through his chaotic personal commitments, her practicality clashing with his stubbornness. She called him out when he pushed too hard and he pushed back, testing her limits. But beneath it, something grew. Respect, fragile and unspoken. He told her about the accident, just the bare bones, the crash, the months in rehab, the betrayal that followed. She listened, her face unreadable, but her silence felt like understanding, not pity. By evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting the room in a warm glow, he tried one last time to charm her. You could do worse than this life, he said, gesturing to the view, the mansion, the world he'd built. Stick with me and you won't have to scrape by anymore. She stood, smoothing her blazer, her eyes locking onto his. I don't need a savior, Mr. King. I need a reason. Give me one that's not about your money and maybe I'll stick around. He froze, her words sinking in, stripping away the veneer he'd worn so long. She didn't wait for a reply, just nodded once and walked out, leaving him alone with the crackling fire and a feeling he couldn't name. Admiration didn't cover it. It was more, something dangerous, something alive. For the first time in years, Sebastian King felt seen, and it terrified him. As Amara stepped into the waiting car, her mind raced. He wasn't what she'd expected either, not just a bitter rich man, but someone wounded, someone real. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she couldn't deny the pull. Back at his mansion, Sebastian stared out the window, watching the car disappear down the drive. She'd challenged him, stripped him bare, and walked away unscathed. He didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing. Amara Jackson wasn't done with him, and he wasn't done with her. The encounter had shifted something fundamental, and the ground beneath them both was trembling, ready to give way to whatever storm lay ahead. The days following Amara's visit to Sebastian's mansion stretched into weeks, each one weaving a thread of connection between them that neither could fully name. She settled into her role as his personal assistant with a quiet determination, her presence a steady rhythm in the chaos of his life. The mansion became their battleground, not of conflict, but of understanding. Mornings were spent in his study, sunlight streaming through the towering windows as they pored over schedules, contracts, and the endless demands of his empire. Afternoons bled into evenings, coffee cups piling up, their conversations drifting from work to something deeper, unguarded. Sebastian watched her with a growing intensity, noting the way she moved, deliberate, unshaken, even when he pushed her. Cancel the dinner with the investors, he'd say, testing her, and she'd counter, you need them more than they need you. Reschedule, don't burn bridges. Her bluntness disarmed him, peeling back layers he'd forgotten existed. She wasn't afraid to call him out, and he found himself craving it, her voice cutting through the noise like a lifeline. One afternoon, as rain drummed against the glass, he caught her staring at a framed photo on his desk, a younger Sebastian standing, laughing with a woman whose face was half hidden. "Who's that?" she asked, her tone curious but careful. He hesitated, his fingers tightening on the armrests. "Elena," he said finally, the name tasting bitter. "Before the accident, before everything." Amara nodded, setting the frame down gently. "She hurt you." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "She left when I couldn't walk anymore, said she couldn't handle it, or me." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with old pain. Amara didn't flinch. "That's her loss, not yours." He looked at her, searching for pity, but found only resolve. "You say that like it's simple." "It's not," she replied, leaning back in her chair, "but it's true." That moment lingered, a quiet shift in the air. They didn't speak of it again that day, but it marked a turning point. She stayed later now, not out of obligation, but choice, and he stopped pretending he didn't notice. They'd sit by the fire, the crackle of logs filling the silence, and talk about his childhood in a cramped apartment, his climb to wealth, the crash that stole his legs. She listened, her dark eyes steady, offering no platitudes, just presence. One evening, weeks later, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside the mansion glistening under a silver moon. They sat in the study, a bottle of wine between them, her idea, not his. The air felt softer, the edges of their usual tension smoothed by exhaustion and something else. Sebastian poured her a glass, his movements deliberate, then set the bottle down, his gaze fixed on her. "I used to believe all women were after something from me," he said, his voice low, unguarded for once. "Money, status, a piece of what I'd built. Elena proved it. Everyone after her just confirmed it. But you're different." Amara took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his. "Different how?" "You don't want anything," he said, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped. "You're here day after day and you don't ask for a damn thing. Why?" She set her glass down, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she leaned forward too, mirroring him, her voice steady but threaded with something raw. Because I don't trust people like you either. Wealthy people, powerful people. I grew up with nothing, less than nothing. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed, and I watched her get stepped on by folks who had everything and still wanted more. Greed's ugly, Mr. King. I've seen it up close. He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. So why stay? Why take the job? Because I needed it, she said simply. And because, I don't know, there's something about you. You're not what I thought. What did you think? He asked, his tone softer now, curious. Another rich man who'd throw money at problems and expect them to disappear, she said, her lips curving slightly. But you don't. You fight. Even when you're an ass about it. He laughed, a real laugh, the sound startling them both. You're not wrong. The silence that followed was warm, heavy with mutual recognition. They'd both been carved by betrayal, shaped by a world that didn't forgive weakness. Yet here they were, sharing a table, a bottle, a moment. She told him more that night about her father, a man who'd chased wealth and left them behind, about the nights she'd gone to bed hungry, about the sister she still sent money to when she could. He listened, his usual armor cracking, and found himself telling her things he'd buried, how he'd clawed his way up after the accident, how Elena's leaving had hollowed him out, how he'd stopped believing in anything but power. You're not hollow, she said at one point, her voice firm, cutting through his self-pity. You're just scared. Scared? He bristled, but her gaze held him still. Yeah, scared to let anyone in. Scared they'll leave like she did. He didn't argue. Couldn't. She'd seen through him, and instead of running, she stayed. The night stretched on, the wine dwindling, their voices growing softer. By the time the clock struck midnight, they were closer, physically, emotionally, than either had intended. She stood to leave, and he caught her wrist, his touch light but insistent. Stay, he said. Not a command, but a question. She looked down at him, her eyes searching his. Why? Because I don't want you to go, he admitted, the words raw, unguarded. She didn't pull away, but she didn't sit either. I'm not her, Sebastian. I won't leave. But I won't be your fix either. I don't want a fix, he said, his voice rough. I just want you here. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded, sitting back down. They didn't speak after that, just sat in the quiet, the fire dying to embers. It was a new beginning, not loud or dramatic, but real, fragile, built on the ashes of their shared scars. Weeks turned to months, and their bond deepened. She learned the rhythm of his pain, physical and otherwise, and he learned hers. They fought, laughed, sat in silence when words weren't enough. One night, as snow fell outside, blanketing the mansion in white, he wheeled himself to her side in the study, his hand finding hers. You've changed me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think that was possible. She squeezed his hand, her smile small but genuine. You've changed me too. I didn't want to trust you, but I do. The twist of her past, her distrust of wealth, her fear of greed, mirrored his own wounds, and in that reflection they found something solid. Not a fairy tale, not a cure, but a beginning. A shared vulnerability that didn't demand perfection, just presence. And as the snow fell, sealing them in that quiet moment, they both knew. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, scars and all. The months that followed their quiet midnight pact in the study were a slow burn, a delicate dance of trust and tension. Amara became a fixture in Sebastian's world, not just at the mansion but in the crevices of his thoughts, his routines, his silences. She'd arrive each morning with coffee and a dry remark, cutting through his gruff exterior with an ease that left him both rattled and grateful. He'd watch her move through the space, organizing his chaos, challenging his stubbornness, and feel a pull he couldn't name, a warmth that crept into the cold corners of his life. Their evenings grew longer, the study their sanctuary. They'd sit by the fire, snow piling outside, and talk, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. She'd tease him about his terrible taste in wine, and he'd fire back about her stubborn refusal to use the car service he offered. "I like walking," she'd say, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Keeps me grounded." He'd smirk, but inside he marveled at her, how she held on to herself, even surrounded by his world of excess. Yet beneath the growing closeness, a current of unease simmered. Sebastian couldn't shake the shadow of doubt, the echo of Elena's betrayal that whispered in his quieter moments. Amara was different. He knew that, felt it, but the fear lingered, a splinter he couldn't dig out. He'd catch himself staring at her, wondering what kept her here, what she saw in him beyond the wealth, beyond the broken man in the chair. She never asked for anything, never hinted at wanting more, and that unnerved him most of all. It didn't fit the pattern he'd built in his mind. One night, as spring bled into the air and the mansion's windows stood open to let in the breeze, the tension snapped into focus. They were in the study, as always, a half-empty bottle of wine on the table, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Amara sat across from him, her legs tucked under her, her dark hair catching the faint light. She was laughing at something he'd said, a rare, unguarded sound that hit him like a punch. He watched her, his chest tightening, and the words slipped out before he could stop them. "Why are you still here?" His voice was soft, almost fragile, a crack in the armor he'd worn so long. "You don't need to stay with a crippled man." The room stilled. Amara's laughter faded, her eyes locking onto his, searching. She set her glass down slowly, deliberately, and leaned forward, her expression shifting from amusement to something fiercer, more resolute. "Don't do that," she said, her tone steady but edged with heat. "Don't make this about your chair. That's not why I'm here, and you know it." He looked away, his jaw tightening, the old wounds flaring. "Then why? You could have anything, anyone. Why me?" She stood, crossing the small distance between them, her footsteps soft but purposeful. "Because you're you, Sebastian. Not the money, not the mansion, not the damn chair. You." She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the faint citrus of her shampoo. "You're a stubborn, infuriating mess, but you're real. And I see you, more than you let most people." His breath caught, her words slicing through the fog of his doubt. He looked up at her, his gray eyes raw, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed since the crash. "You don't know what you're signing up for," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not easy." She laughed, short and sharp. "You think I am? I'm still here because I want to be, not because I need to be. Stop trying to push me away." He didn't know what to say, didn't trust himself to speak. The air between them thickened, charged with everything they hadn't said, everything they felt but couldn't name. His hand twitched, wanting to reach for her, but he held back, the fear still clawing at him. What if she changed her mind? What if she saw the truth, the weakness, the scars, and walked away like the rest? Amara saw it, the hesitation, the war in his eyes, and made the choice for him. She leaned down, her hands framing his face, and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or soft, it was sure, fierce, a declaration that cut through his defenses like a blade. Her lips pressed against his, warm and unyielding, and for a moment he froze, stunned by the weight of it. Then he gave in, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer as he kissed her back with a hunger he hadn't known he still had. The world narrowed to that point. The heat of her mouth, the press of her fingers against his skin, the way she didn't pull away. It wasn't about his disability, his wealth, his past. It was about him, and she made that clear in every second of that kiss. When she finally drew back, her breath uneven, her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unguarded. "Stop doubting me," she said, her voice low, firm. "I'm not going anywhere." He stared at her, his heart pounding, the doubt still there but quieter now, drowned out by the reality of her. "You're insane," he muttered, but there was a faint smile tugging at his lips, a crack of light in the darkness he'd carried so long. "Maybe," she said, stepping back but not breaking eye contact. "But so are you." The rest of the night unfolded in a haze of newness. They didn't kiss again, not yet, but the air between them had shifted, charged with an attraction that had been building for months. They talked, laughed, sat closer than before, their hands brushing occasionally, each touch a spark. But the tension didn't fade. It grew, layered with questions neither could fully answer. For Sebastian, it was a battle between trust and fear, a pull toward her that terrified him as much as it thrilled him. For Amara, it was a leap into uncharted waters, a choice to let him in despite her own guarded heart. As she left that night, the stars sharp against the spring sky, he watched her go, his mind a storm of conflicting currents. She'd kissed him, and it had rewritten everything he thought he knew. But the doubt lingered, a whisper he couldn't silence. What if she's wrong about me? What if I ruin this too? He didn't sleep, replaying the moment, the feel of her, the certainty in her eyes. Amara, walking home through the cool night, felt her own storm brewing. She'd crossed a line not just with him but with herself, and it left her raw, exposed. She didn't regret it, couldn't, but she knew what it meant. They were tethered now, bound by something neither could walk away from easily. And as the days turned to weeks, that tension only deepened, their attraction a live wire, their vulnerabilities laid bare, setting the stage for a collision neither could predict. Do you believe that true love can conquer all challenges, even family pressure? Tell us in the comments. The kiss in the study had ignited something unstoppable, a current that surged through the weeks that followed, pulling Sebastian and Amara closer with every shared glance, every fleeting touch. The tension between them grew taut, a thread stretched to its limit, vibrating with unspoken desire. They danced around it, her sharp wit clashing with his dry humor, their late-night conversations veering into dangerous territory, their silences heavy with what they wouldn't say. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, now thrummed with their presence, a space alive with the heat of their unspoken longing. It was a humid summer evening when the thread finally snapped. The air hung thick, pressing against the open windows of the study, the distant rumble of thunder rolling through the hills. They'd been working late, Amara sorting through a stack of contracts, Sebastian reviewing numbers on his tablet, the fire unlit for once, replaced by the faint glow of a single lamp. The room felt smaller, the space between them charged, electric. She stretched, rolling her shoulders, and caught him watching her, his gray eyes dark, unguarded, tracing the line of her neck. "What?" she asked, her voice light but her pulse quickening. "Nothing," he said, but his tone was rough, belying the word. He set the tablet down, his hands restless on the armrests. "You're distracting?" She raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. "I'm just sitting here." "Exactly," he muttered, and the air shifted, the pretense dropping away. Amara stood, crossing to his side of the desk, her movements slow, deliberate. "You've been staring at me all night. Say what you mean, Sebastian." He looked up at her, his jaw tight, his resolve fraying. "I mean, I can't stop thinking about you, about that kiss, about what it'd be like to—" He stopped, exhaling sharply, his hands clenching. "I shouldn't." "Why not?" she challenged, stepping closer, her voice low, daring. "What's stopping you?" He didn't answer with words. His hand shot out, catching her wrist, pulling her toward him with a force that surprised them both. She didn't resist, didn't hesitate. She leaned down, her lips crashing into his, and the world tilted. This kiss wasn't gentle like the first. It was raw, hungry, a release of months of pent-up need. His hands slid to her waist, tugging her onto his lap, her knees bracketing him as she deepened the kiss, her fingers threading through his hair. "Amara?" He breathed against her mouth, his voice ragged, a question and a plea. "Don't stop," she whispered, her hands roaming his shoulders, his chest, igniting sparks wherever they touched. "I want this. I want you." That was all he needed. He wheeled them out of the study, down the hall, to his bedroom, a vast space of dark wood and soft linens, the windows open to the storm brewing outside. The air crackled as they shed barriers, her blouse, his shirt, their doubts, each touch a revelation. She didn't flinch at his scars, didn't pause at the chair. She saw him, all of him, and wanted him anyway. He pulled her close, his hands mapping her skin, her curves, memorizing her as thunder rolled and lightning split the sky. They gave in fully that night, their bodies tangling in a dance of need and trust. It was passionate, messy, real, her gasps mingling with his groans, the storm outside mirroring the one within. He murmured her name like a prayer, and she answered with his, their connection transcending words. Hours passed in a blur of heat and surrender, the world shrinking to the space between them, until exhaustion claimed them, their limbs entwined, the rain a soft lullaby against the windows. But the morning after brought a shift, a fracture in the afterglow. Amara woke first, the gray light filtering through the curtains, Sebastian's arm draped across her waist. She lay still, her heart pounding, the warmth of him against her a stark contrast to the cold doubt creeping in. Last night had been everything, intense, undeniable, but now, in the quiet, questions clawed at her. Had she crossed a line? She'd let herself fall, let him in, but what did it mean? Was this love or just a reckless leap? She'd spent years guarding herself against men like him, powerful, complicated, and now she was tangled in his sheets, his life, his heart. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded to the window, wrapping a sheet around herself. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening, but her mind churned. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. She cared for him, more than cared, but the vulnerability terrified her. What if he woke up and regretted it? What if she'd misread him, misjudged this? Sebastian stirred, his voice rough with sleep. "Amara?" She turned, forcing a small smile. "Hey." He propped himself up, his eyes searching hers, the morning light catching the lines of his face. "You're up early. Everything okay?" "Yeah," she lied, her voice too bright. "Just thinking." He frowned, sensing the shift. "About last night?" She hesitated, then nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It was incredible, but it's a lot. I don't know what this makes us." He reached for her hand, his touch steady but cautious. "It makes us whatever we want it to be. I don't regret it if that's what you're worried about." She met his gaze, her throat tight. "I don't either. But I'm scared, Sebastian. I don't let people in, not like this. And you're not just anyone." He pulled her closer, his hand cupping her face. "I'm scared too. I haven't done this since, well, you know, but I trust you, more than I thought I could." Her eyes softened, but the conflict lingered. "I trust you too. I just need to figure out what this means for me." He nodded, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." They spent the morning in a fragile truce, coffee on the balcony, quiet conversation, the weight of the night settling between them. She didn't pull away, but she didn't fully lean in either, her mind a tangle of desire and doubt. He watched her, his own fears simmering. Would she stay, or would this be the moment he lost her? The passion had been real, but the morning exposed their raw edges, leaving them both wondering what came next in this unexpected turn of their story. The morning after their passionate night lingered like a quiet storm, its echoes rippling through the days and weeks that followed. Amara and Sebastian navigated the shift with care, neither pulling away, but neither fully diving in. The mansion held their rhythm, mornings of coffee and shared glances, evenings of work and stolen touches, nights where they'd sit by the fire, the air thick with unspoken questions. She'd catch him watching her, his gray eyes soft yet searching, and he'd feel her presence like a tether, grounding him even as doubt gnawed at his edges. They didn't talk about that night directly, not at first. Instead, they let it simmer, letting their actions speak. She'd rest her hand on his shoulder as she passed, a silent reassurance. He'd wheel closer when they worked, his knee brushing hers, a quiet claim. But the tension remained, a fragile thread stretched between trust and fear. Amara wrestled with her conflict, her heart pulling her toward him, her mind warning her of the risks. Sebastian battled his own demons, wanting her fully, fearing she'd wake up one day and see him as less than enough. One evening, as summer faded into a crisp autumn, they sat on the balcony, the sky streaked with gold and amber. The air smelled of leaves and possibility, and Amara broke the silence. "I don't regret it," she said, her voice steady, her eyes on the horizon. "That night I need to know I'm not losing myself in this." He turned to her, his hand finding hers. "You're not. You're still you, stubborn, fierce, everything I—" He stopped, swallowing the word, then tried again. "I don't want to take anything from you, Amara. I just want to be with you." She squeezed his hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know. I'm getting there." That moment eased something, a knot loosening but not untying. They grew closer still, nights spent tangled in each other's arms, mornings waking to soft kisses, their connection deepening with every shared breath. Yet, beneath it, Amara's hesitation lingered, a quiet echo of her past, and Sebastian felt it, his own resolve hardening. He'd never been surer of anything, or anyone, than he was of her. By late autumn, the leaves had fallen, blanketing the mansion's grounds in rust and gold. Sebastian knew what he wanted, what he needed. He'd spent years building an empire, but Amara had built something greater in him. Hope, trust, a future he hadn't dared dream of. One crisp evening, as the first stars pierced the sky, he made his move. He'd planned it carefully, not grand or ostentatious, but intimate, theirs. The housekeeper was dismissed for the night, the study transformed with candles flickering along the shelves, a small table set with her favorite meal, simple pasta, wine, a nod to the nights they'd shared. When Amara arrived, her hair damp from a sudden rain, she paused in the doorway, her eyes widening. "What's this?" she asked, stepping inside, her boots leaving faint tracks on the wood. He wheeled forward, his expression calm but his pulse racing. "Sit. I want to show you something." She raised an eyebrow but complied, settling across from him, her curiosity piqued. "You cooked?" "Ordered," he admitted, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "But I plated it." She laughed, the sound easing the tightness in his chest. They ate, talked about her day, his latest deal, the way the rain made the city glow. It was familiar, comfortable, yet the air held a charge, a secret he carried in his pocket. When the plates were cleared, he took a breath, his hands steady despite the storm inside. "Amara," he said, his voice low, drawing her full attention. "I need to say something." She tilted her head, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Okay." He reached for her hand across the table, his grip firm, warm. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. After everything, the accident, Elena, the years I spent shutting everyone out, I thought that was it. Just me and this life I built. But then you walked in, called me out in that damn restaurant, and changed everything." He paused, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You see me, all of me, and you stay. You make me better, make me want more than I ever thought I could have." Her breath hitched, sensing where this was going, but she didn't pull away. "Sebastian, let me finish," he said, his tone soft but insistent. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, and her eyes widened. He opened it, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond catching the candlelight. "I love you, Amara. I never thought I'd say that again, but I do. Will you be mine forever?" The room stilled, the weight of his words hanging between them. Amara stared at the ring, then at him, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it. Love. She felt it, had felt it growing for months, but the word, the promise, hit her like a wave. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope, the fear, and it mirrored her own. Her mind raced. Trust, the one thing she'd guarded so fiercely, now laid bare before her. Could she give it fully? Was she ready? "I," she faltered, her voice trembling, and his face fell slightly, bracing for rejection. She saw it, hated it, and pushed forward. "I love you too, Sebastian, I do. But it's big. I need a minute." He nodded, closing the box but not pulling his hand from hers. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." She exhaled, relief and conflict warring inside her. "It's not that I don't want to. I've never let anyone this close. It scares me." "I get that," he said, his voice steady, grounding. "I'm scared too, but I know what I feel, and I'll wait, however long it takes." They sat there, hands clasped, the candles flickering lower, the night stretching around them. She didn't say yes, not yet, but she didn't say no either. Deep down, she knew she'd fallen for him, irrevocably, the kind of love that didn't fade. The hesitation wasn't doubt in him, it was doubt in herself, in her readiness to leap. He saw it, understood it, and that only made her love him more. The rest of the night was quiet, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her, the ring box on the table a silent promise. They didn't need words, their closeness said enough. For Sebastian, it was a step, a hope. For Amara, it was a crossroads, a choice she'd wrestle with in the days to come. The proposal had shifted their story, not ending it, but opening a new chapter, one where love and trust would fight to find their balance. The night of Sebastian's proposal lingered like a soft glow, its warmth wrapping around them even as Amara wrestled with her answer. The ring box sat untouched on the study table for days, a quiet sentinel of their unspoken pact. Her hesitation, his patience. They didn't push it. Instead, they leaned into the rhythm they'd built. Mornings were spent in companionable silence, her pouring coffee while he skimmed reports, afternoons filled with work and stolen glances, evenings ending with her curled against him on the couch, the fire crackling as they shared pieces of their days. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't left either, and for Sebastian that was enough. For now. Autumn deepened, the air growing sharp, the leaves a carpet of crimson and gold outside the mansion. Amara felt the shift inside her, too, a slow thawing of her fear, a growing certainty that Sebastian was her anchor, not her cage. She'd catch herself smiling at him, her heart lighter than it had been in years, and he'd return it, his gray eyes softening in a way that made her ache. They were close, closer than ever, teetering on the edge of forever, when the past came crashing back to test them. It started with a phone call. Amara was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, a rare night where she'd insisted on cooking, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands, glancing at the unfamiliar number, and answered with a casual, "Hello? Amara?" The voice was low, rough, a ghost she'd buried years ago. Her stomach dropped. "Miss me?" She froze, the knife slipping from her hand to clatter on the counter. "Derek?" Sebastian, in the next room, heard the edge in her tone and wheeled closer, his brow furrowing. "Who's that?" he asked, but she held up a hand, her face pale. "Yeah, it's me," Derek said, his voice slick with a confidence she'd once mistaken for charm. "Been a while, huh? Thought I'd check in on my girl." "I'm not your girl," she snapped, her grip tightening on the phone. "What do you want from me?" He laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Oh, I think you know. Saw you've been cozying up to that rich guy, King, right? Figured you'd moved on, but I know you, Amara. You don't forget me that easy. Come back and we can keep this quiet. All those little secrets from back then, stay buried. Otherwise—" Her breath hitched, terror clawing at her chest. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" he said, his tone darkening. "Try me. I've got nothing to lose. You do." The line went dead, leaving her staring at the phone, her hands trembling. Sebastian rolled closer, his voice steady but urgent. "Amara, what's going on?" She turned to him, her eyes wide, haunted. "It's Derek, my ex. He's back." Sebastian's jaw tightened, his hands clenching the armrests. "What does he want?" She sank into a chair, running a hand through her hair. "Me? Or he'll tell everyone about my past, stuff I've never told you, stuff I'm not proud of." He reached for her, his touch firm, grounding. "Tell me, whatever it is, I don't care." She shook her head, pulling back slightly. "It's not that simple. I was young, stupid, ran with the wrong crowd after my dad left. Petty theft, scams, nothing big, but enough to ruin me now. He was part of it. I got out, rebuilt my life, but he's got proof. Pictures, records. If he talks—" "He won't," Sebastian said, his voice hard, resolute. "I'll handle it." "Sebastian, no," she said, her tone sharp with panic. "You don't know him. He's dangerous, not in a flashy way, just persistent. He'll drag us both down." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Let him try." The next few days were a storm of tension. Derek called again, then showed up outside her old apartment, lurking, watching, a shadow she couldn't shake. Amara grew quiet, withdrawn, her fear clashing with her instinct to protect Sebastian from her mess. He noticed, hated it, but didn't push, until the night Derek crossed the line. It was late, the mansion dark, save for the study's glow, when Amara's phone lit up with a text. "Meet me. Alley off 5th. Now. Or the pics go public." She stared at it, her heart racing, then grabbed her coat. Sebastian caught her at the door, his voice low, commanding. "Where are you going?" She hesitated, then sighed. "To end this? He's threatening to leak everything." "Alone?" His eyes narrowed. "No chance. I'm coming." "Sebastian." "No," he cut in, his tone final. "We're in this together." Reluctantly, she agreed, and they drove in silence, the city lights blurring past. The alley was dim, wet from earlier rain, and Derek waited, lean, unshaven, his smirk a blade. "There's my girl," he drawled, stepping forward. "And the billionaire. Cute." "What do you want from me?" Amara asked, her voice trembling but defiant. "Money. A fight, just say it." "You," he said, his eyes glinting. "Always you. Walk away from him and this stays quiet." Sebastian laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the night. "You're out of your depth, pal," Derek sneered. "Big talk from a guy who can't stand up." Amara flinched, but Sebastian didn't. He wheeled closer, his presence towering despite the chair. "You think you can blackmail her? Threaten us? Here's what's going to happen." He pulled out his phone, his voice calm, lethal. "Paul, it's me. Yeah, the guy from the file, Derek Hayes. Pull it all. Warrants, debts, every dirty corner. Send it to the feds. Now." Derek's smirk faltered. What? Shut up, Sebastian snapped, his eyes locked on him. I've had people digging since she told me your name. You've got 3 outstanding warrants, a gambling debt that'll bury you, and a rap sheet that makes hers look like a parking ticket. 1 call and you're done. So here's your choice. Disappear, or spend the next decade in a cell. Amara stared, shock rooting her in place. Derek's face paled, his bravado crumbling. You're bluffing. Try me, Sebastian said, echoing Amara's words from their first meeting, his voice a steel blade. Derek hesitated, then backed away, muttering curses as he melted into the shadows. The alley fell silent, the tension draining into the night. Amara turned to Sebastian, her breath uneven. How did you? I protect what's mine, he said simply, his hand finding hers. You're not facing this alone. She nodded, relief flooding her, but the conflict lingered. His move had saved her, stunned her, yet it stirred the old fears. Back at the mansion, they sat in the study, the fire roaring, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice quiet. Risk all that for me. Yes, I did, he replied, his tone firm. You're worth it. She looked at him, her heart torn, grateful, shaken, more in love than ever, but the trust still fragile. Derek was gone, but the rift he'd opened stayed, a crack they'd have to mend together. The confrontation with Derek left a mark on Amara and Sebastian, a bruise that pulsed beneath their growing bond. The ride back to the mansion that night was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space where words failed. Amara stared out the window, her mind replaying Sebastian's decisive strike. How he'd dismantled Derek with a single call, how he'd stood for her when she couldn't. It shook her, the depth of his commitment, and yet it stirred the old doubts too. She'd let him in, deeper than anyone before, but the vulnerability gnawed at her. Sebastian beside her felt the shift, her silence heavier than usual, her hand in his, a lifeline he clung to. Back in the study, the fire's warmth couldn't fully thaw the chill between them. She sipped her tea, her eyes distant, and he watched her, his own thoughts churning. You're still shaken, he said finally, his voice low, probing. She nodded, setting the mug down. It's not just Derek, it's you, how you handled it. I'm grateful, Sebastian, but it's a lot, knowing you'd go that far. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. I'd go further if I had to. You're not a liability to me, Amara. You're everything. Her gaze softened, but the tension lingered. I know. I just need time to catch up to this, to us. He nodded, his patience a quiet strength. Take it. I'm here. The next few days were a delicate truce, closeness tempered by reflection. She stayed at the mansion, her presence a comfort, and he gave her space, his trust unwavering even as he wrestled with his own fears. They fell back into their rhythm, coffee in the morning, work in the afternoon, quiet nights by the fire. But the air held a new weight, a question of what came next after such a storm. That question found its answer sooner than either expected. A week later, as the last of autumn's leaves clung to the trees, Sebastian's family descended. His sister Claire arrived unannounced, her sleek car pulling up the drive with a purpose that set Amara's instincts on edge. Claire was sharp-edged, blonde, poised, her tailored coat and cool smile a stark contrast to Amara's warmth. With her came their mother, Margaret, a silver-haired matriarch whose presence filled the room like a cold wind. Sebastian greeted them in the foyer, his jaw tight. What's this about? Claire's eyes flicked to Amara, standing a step behind him, then back to him. We need to talk. Family business. Amara excused herself, heading to the kitchen, but Sebastian's voice stopped her. Stay. You're part of this now. Margaret's brow arched, her disapproval clear, but she said nothing as they moved to the study. The fire crackled, casting shadows across the room, and Claire wasted no time. "We've heard about her," she said, nodding toward Amara. "The waitress." "People talk, Sebastian. They say she's got you wrapped around her finger." "She's not a waitress," he said, his tone even but firm. "She's my assistant. And more." Margaret sighed, her voice clipped. "That's the problem, darling. She's not one of us. She doesn't understand this world. Our world. You need someone who gets the lifestyle, the responsibilities." Amara bristled, her hands curling at her sides, but Sebastian spoke before she could. "She's not like the others, Claire. She's not after my money or my name. She's here for me." Claire laughed, a brittle sound. "That's what they all say at first. Look at Elena. She played the same game, and you nearly lost everything. We're just trying to protect you." "I don't need protecting," he snapped, his voice rising. "I know her. She's fought for everything she has, more than we ever had to. She's not here to take. She's here because she chooses to be." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. And what happens when she realizes this life isn't as glamorous as it looks? When the novelty wears off? You're vulnerable, Sebastian, more than you admit. Amara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the heat in her chest. "I'm not here for glamour. I'm here for him. If you think I'd leave because it's hard, you don't know me at all." Claire smirked, unfazed. "We don't. That's the point. You're an unknown, a risk." Sebastian's hands gripped the armrests, his patience snapping. "Enough. You don't get to decide this. I don't care what you think, what anyone thinks. She's not a risk. She's my choice." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Margaret's lips thinned, but she didn't argue. Claire crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "You're making a mistake," she said, standing. "Don't say we didn't warn you." They left shortly after, their departure a storm cloud dissipating, but the tension stayed. Amara stood by the window, watching their car vanish down the drive, her mind racing. Sebastian wheeled to her side, his hand brushing hers. "I meant it," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't need their approval. I need you." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "They're your family. You sure about this?" "More than anything," he replied, his grip tightening. "They don't see you like I do. They never will." She nodded, a small smile breaking through. "You're stubborn as hell, you know that?" He smirked. "Takes one to know one." The moment eased the strain, but the challenge lingered. His family's words had struck a nerve, planting seeds of doubt in Amara, testing Sebastian's resolve. They spent the night close, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, but the air held a new edge. The world outside their bond was closing in, and they'd have to face it together, or risk it tearing them apart. The clash with Sebastian's family left a lingering echo, a ripple that unsettled the fragile peace Amara and Sebastian had carved out. The mansion, once their sanctuary, now felt like a stage where unseen eyes judged her every move. Claire and Margaret's words, sharp, dismissive, replayed in Amara's mind, sowing doubts she couldn't shake. She'd stood her ground, matched their fire with her own, but the aftermath gnawed at her. Did she belong here? Could she? The question followed her through the days that followed, a shadow she couldn't outrun. Sebastian sensed it, the way her smiles grew rarer, her silences deeper. He'd catch her staring out the study window, her hands idle, her thoughts a world away. "You're quiet," he said one morning, wheeling to her side as she poured coffee, her movements mechanical. "Just thinking," she replied, her voice light but strained. She handed him a mug, avoiding his gaze. "About them?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. She sighed, leaning against the counter. "Them. Me. This." She gestured vaguely, at the gleaming kitchen, the sprawling house. the life he'd built. It's a lot, Sebastian. He set the mug down, his hand finding hers. They don't matter, I told you that. I know, she said, her fingers curling around his. But it's not just them. It's everything. The tension simmered as November swept in, the air turning brittle with early frost. Amara threw herself into work, scheduling his meetings, managing his calls, but her heart wasn't in it. She'd walk the mansion's halls, her boots echoing on marble, and feel like an intruder. The staff nodded politely, the luxury surrounded her, yet she couldn't shake the sense of being out of place. She'd catch glimpses of herself in the mirrors, simple blazer, no makeup, hair pulled back, and wonder who she was becoming. The woman who'd confronted Sebastian in that restaurant felt distant, buried under the weight of his world. One evening, as snow dusted the grounds, the strain boiled over. They were in the study, the fire roaring, a quiet that should have been comfortable stretched taut instead. Sebastian was reviewing a contract, his brow furrowed, while Amara sat across from him, her notebook open but untouched. She stared at the flames, her mind a tangle, until the words slipped out, soft but heavy. I'm just a simple woman, Sebastian. This life isn't for me. He looked up, the contract forgotten, his eyes locking onto hers. What do you mean? She stood, pacing to the window, her arms crossed. This, your family, the money, the expectations. I don't fit. I'm not cut out for it. I thought I could handle it, but it's swallowing me whole. He wheeled closer, his voice steady but urgent. You're not swallowed. You're here, with me. She turned, her eyes glistening, frustration spilling over. But who am I here? Your assistant, your girlfriend, some project to prove you're not alone. I don't know anymore. I used to know exactly who I was, working my jobs, fighting my fights. Now I'm lost. His jaw tightened, pain flashing across his face. You think I want to change you? That's not what this is. Then what is it? She shot back, her voice rising. Because every day I feel like I'm drowning in this. Your world, your rules. I love you, Sebastian, but I don't know if I can live like this. He reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward him, his grip firm but not forceful. Listen to me. This isn't about the world out there, the wealth, the status, my damn family. It's about us, you and me. That's what matters. She shook her head, pulling back slightly. You say that, but it's not that simple. Your life comes with all this, the pressure, the judgment. I'm not like Claire or your mom. I don't know how to be. You don't have to be, he said, his voice fierce, cutting through her spiral. I don't want you to be them. I want you, Amara Jackson, the woman who called me out, who doesn't bend, who makes me feel alive. The rest, it's noise. We can shut it out. She stared at him, her chest tight, tears threatening. What if I can't? What if I'm not enough for this? You're enough for me, he said, his hands framing her face, his eyes burning with conviction. The money, the mansion, it's nothing without you. I'd give it all up if it meant keeping you. Her breath hitched, his words piercing the fog of her doubt. You don't mean that? Try me, he said, echoing their earliest days, his voice steady as steel. I built this life from scratch once. I can do it again. With you, however you want it. Simple, quiet, whatever. Just don't walk away. She sank onto the couch beside him, her hands trembling as she took his. I don't want to walk away, I'm scared I'll lose myself trying to fit. You won't, he promised, pulling her close, his forehead resting against hers. You're stronger than this, than me, than any of it. And I'll fight to keep you whole, not to change you. The fire crackled, the snow falling thicker outside, and they sat there, tangled in each other, her fears laid bare, his resolve a shield. She didn't have all the answers, didn't know if she'd ever fully fit, but his words anchored her, a lifeline in the storm. The struggle wasn't over. The pressure of his world wouldn't vanish. But in that moment she chose to believe him, that their love, not his wealth, defined them. And as his arms tightened around her, she felt the first flicker of hope that she could find her place, not in his world, but with him. The snow continued to fall outside the mansion, blanketing the world in a hush that mirrored the fragile peace Amara and Sebastian found in the study. Her confession, "I'm just a simple woman, this life isn't for me," had cracked something open, and his response, "I'd give it all up if it meant keeping you," had stitched it back together, not perfectly, but enough. They stayed there, her head against his chest, his arms around her, the fire's glow softening the edges of their struggle. The tension didn't vanish, it never would entirely, but it eased, replaced by a quiet resolve to face it together. The days that followed were a delicate balance. Amara leaned into their bond, letting his certainty bolster her own. She stopped fighting the mansion's grandeur, instead claiming small corners, her favorite mug on the counter, a blanket draped over the couch, as her own. Sebastian watched her reclaim herself, his love deepening with every step she took towards staying. They didn't speak of the proposal again, the ring box still a silent promise on the table, but their closeness spoke louder than words, hands brushing in the kitchen, shared laughter over dinner, nights where she fell asleep beside him, her breath a steady rhythm against his fears. Winter tightened its grip, the days growing shorter, the air sharp with frost. Amara felt the shift, not just in the season, but in herself. She'd been tired lately, a bone-deep exhaustion she chalked up to the emotional storm of the past weeks. But one morning, as she stood in the bathroom brushing her teeth, a wave of nausea hit her, sudden and fierce. She gripped the sink, her reflection pale in the mirror, and a thought, wild, impossible, flashed through her mind. Her hands trembled as she rummaged through a drawer, finding a test she'd bought months ago on a whim, never expecting to need it. The minutes stretched as she waited, pacing the tiled floor, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. When the two lines appeared, stark against the white strip, she sank onto the edge of the tub, the test clutched in her hand. Pregnant. The word echoed, a shockwave through her carefully rebuilt world. Fear surged first. How could she do this? She'd barely found her footing with Sebastian, with his life, and now this. But beneath it, a flicker of something else stirred, hope, fragile but real. She didn't tell him right away. She needed time to sit with it, to let it settle. For 2 days she carried the secret, her mind a tangle of what-ifs. She'd catch herself resting a hand on her stomach, imagining a future she hadn't planned, a child, their child, and the fear would war with a quiet joy she couldn't name. Sebastian noticed her distraction, the way she'd drift mid-conversation, but he didn't push, trusting her to come to him when she was ready. That moment came on a snowy evening, the mansion quiet save for the crackle of the fire in the study. They were on the couch, her legs draped over his lap, his hand tracing idle patterns on her knee. She'd been staring at the flames, her silence heavier than usual, and he finally spoke. "You've been somewhere else all day," he said, his voice soft, teasing. "What's going on in that head of yours?" She took a breath, her hand slipping into his, squeezing tight. "I need to tell you something, and I'm scared." His brow furrowed, his grip tightening. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it. Tell me." She met his eyes, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm pregnant, Sebastian." The words hung there, a heartbeat stretching into eternity. His face went blank, shock wiping away expression, and her stomach dropped. She braced for doubt, for fear, for the walls she'd seen him build before. But then his eyes softened, a slow smile breaking through, raw and unguarded. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Yeah, I found out a couple days ago. I didn't know how to tell you. I still don't know what to think. This changes everything." He pulled her closer, his hands framing her face, his smile widening into something radiant. "It does. God, Amara, it does. And it's incredible." She blinked, caught off guard. "You're happy? Happy?" He laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the walls. "I'm terrified. I didn't think I'd ever get this. But yeah, I'm happy. A kid? Our kid? I can't believe it." Her fear cracked, relief flooding in. "I thought you'd freak out. I'm freaking out. I don't know if I'm ready for this. With us, with your world, all of it." He shook his head, his thumbs brushing away the tears that slipped free. "I'm scared too. I've never done this. Never thought I could. But with you, I want it. I'll be the best father I can be, I swear it. We'll figure it out together." She laughed through her tears, a shaky sound of surrender. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said, pulling her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her. "But I love you, and I love this. Us, this kid, whatever comes next." They sat there, tangled in each other, the fire casting a warm glow over the moment that changed everything. Her fear didn't vanish. It lingered, a quiet hum beneath her growing joy, but his certainty steadied her. This wasn't just a twist, it was a tether, binding them deeper, a life they'd create together. And as the snow fell outside, sealing them in that promise, Amara felt the shift. Not an end to her struggles, but a beginning she could face with him by her side. The revelation of Amara's pregnancy settled over them like a new dawn, its light piercing the shadows of doubt that had lingered for so long. That night in the study, wrapped in each other's arms, Sebastian's joy and Amara's cautious hope wove a fragile but fierce bond. They stayed up late, whispering about the future, a crib in the corner, tiny footsteps in the halls, each word a brick in the life they were building. Her fear softened with every promise he made, his hand resting on her stomach, as if he could already feel the life growing there. "We're a team," he murmured, kissing her forehead, and she nodded, letting herself believe it. The next morning brought a tender quiet. Coffee shared on the balcony, snowflakes catching in her hair, his smile a constant as they navigated this uncharted path. But the peace was short-lived, shattered by the arrival of Sebastian's family once more, their presence a cold wind blowing through the warmth they'd found. It was mid-afternoon when the sleek black car rolled up the drive, Claire and Margaret stepping out with purpose etched in their strides. Sebastian met them in the foyer, Amara at his side, her hand in his, a silent declaration. The air crackled with tension as they moved to the study, the fire doing little to thaw the chill of their intent. Margaret spoke first, her voice clipped, her silver hair gleaming under the light. "We've heard rumors, Sebastian, about her, about a child. Is it true?" He didn't flinch, his grip on Amara's hand tightening. "Yes, Amara's pregnant. We're having a baby." Claire's eyes narrowed, her arms crossing. "And you think this is the time to play house? The empire's at a tipping point. Investors are nervous, competitors are circling. You need stability. Not this." Amara bristled, but Sebastian's voice cut through before she could respond. "This is stability. She's my family now." Margaret sighed, her tone softening but firm. "You need someone who understands our world, Sebastian, the stakes, the alliances, the legacy. She's not equipped for this, her or a child. You're risking everything we've built." "She's more equipped than you'll ever know," he said, his voice low, steady. "She's fought harder than any of us, and she's mine. That's not up for debate." Claire stepped forward, her gaze cold. "You're blinded by her. Think of the business, the deals that'll crumble if you tie yourself to someone like her. We're not saying end it. Just reconsider marriage. Keep it discreet until things settle." Amara's heart sank, the weight of their words pressing down, But Sebastian's resolve didn't waver. He wheeled closer to his mother, his eyes blazing. "Number, I'm done letting you control this. You don't get it. She's not a liability, she's my strength. I'd rather lose the empire than lose her." The room stilled, his words a thunderclap. Margaret's lips thinned, Claire's composure faltered, but neither spoke. Amara stared at him, shock and love warring in her chest. He turned to her, his hand lifting to her cheek. "I choose you," he said, softer now, just for her. "You and our kid. That's my world now." Margaret stood, smoothing her coat. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," he replied, unflinching. "But it's my choice to make." They left without another word, the door closing behind them like a final chord. Amara exhaled, trembling, and sank onto the couch. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice thick. "Your family, your business." "Yes, I did," he cut in, pulling her close. "They don't own me. You do. You and this life we're building. I meant it, Amara. You're my everything." She buried her face in his shoulder, tears slipping free. Not from fear, but from the weight of his choice. The tension with his family wasn't resolved. It would linger, a battle yet to come. But in that moment, his rejection of their control was a victory, a line drawn in the snow. They held each other, the fire crackling, their future uncertain, but theirs, forged in love over legacy. Sebastian's defiance in the face of his family's pressure reverberated through the mansion, a declaration that shifted the ground beneath them. The silence after Claire and Margaret's departure was thick, charged with the weight of his choice. Amara clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt, overwhelmed by the depth of his commitment. "You gave up so much," she whispered, her voice raw. "I didn't give up anything," he replied, his hand cradling her face. "I chose what matters." His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away the dampness, and she nodded, letting his certainty anchor her trembling heart. The snow outside fell heavier, sealing them in that moment, a promise forged against the odds. The days that followed were a quiet flurry of resolve. Sebastian doubled down on his stance, redirecting his focus to secure the empire on his terms, while Amara leaned into the life growing inside her, her hand often resting on her still flat stomach. The tension with his family lingered, an unspoken rift, but it couldn't touch the bond they'd built. And as winter deepened, Sebastian made another choice, one he'd held close since the night he proposed. One evening, with the mansion glowing under a fresh layer of snow, he wheeled into the study where Amara sat by the fire, a book in her lap. He held a small box. Not the ring this time, but something new. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady, eyes locked on hers. "Not tomorrow, not next year, soon. I don't want to wait any more." She looked at him, the book slipping to the floor, her heart pounding. "Sebastian, I know you're still figuring it out," he said, rolling closer. "But I'm sure. I want us, you, me, this baby, to be a family, officially. Say yes." Her hesitation flickered, then faded, swallowed by the love in his gaze. "Yes," she whispered, and his smile broke wide, lighting the room. The wedding came together swiftly, not with the grandeur his family might have demanded, but with a simplicity that felt like them. They chose a quiet spot on the mansion grounds, a clearing framed by snow-laden trees, the air crisp and still. A handful of guests gathered, Paul, a few loyal friends, Amara's sister Lila flown in from out of state. No pomp, just presence. The officiant stood ready, a wooden arch draped in evergreen, the only nod to tradition. Amara walked toward him, her dress white and flowing, simple yet radiant against the snow, a shawl around her shoulders to ward off the chill. Her hair caught the light, her eyes bright with a mix of nerves and joy. Sebastian waited, his chair adorned with a single sprig of holly, his suit sharp but understated. When she reached him, he took her hand, his grip warm, steady. The ceremony was brief, words of love and commitment spoken over the soft rustle of wind through the trees. When it was his turn, Sebastian looked up at her, his voice clear despite the emotion thickening it. "This is the happiest day of my life," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've given me everything I didn't know I needed. Love, hope, a future. I'll spend every day making sure you feel the same." Her breath caught, tears pricking as she squeezed his hand. "I was scared I wouldn't fit here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But with you, I do. I love you, Sebastian, more than I thought I could." They exchanged rings, hers the one he'd offered months ago, his a band she'd chosen, simple and strong like him. The officiant pronounced them married, and he pulled her down for a kiss, fierce and tender, the small crowd cheering as snowflakes danced around them. The reception was intimate, laughter and warmth in the mansion's dining room, a meal shared over stories and toasts. Amara felt the last of her uncertainty melt away, not because his world had changed, but because she'd found her place in it, beside him, as his wife, as the mother of their child. The twist wasn't in the day itself, but in her heart. She embraced it fully, no longer a simple woman adrift, but a partner, a lover, a family. And as they stood together, watching the snow fall through the window, their hands entwined, she knew. This was her life now, and she'd chosen it with him. The wedding's glow carried Sebastian and Amara through the final weeks of winter, a beacon as they prepared for the life ahead. The intimate ceremony had sealed their commitment, and the mansion transformed into a space of anticipation, Amara nesting with quiet determination, Sebastian overseeing every detail with a fierce protectiveness. They'd lie together at night, her head on his chest, his hand on her growing belly, feeling the kicks that promised their future. "He's strong," she'd say, smiling, and he'd nod, his voice soft with awe. Like his mom. Spring arrived with a burst of warmth, melting the snow into rivers that wound through the grounds. Amara's pregnancy progressed, her energy waning as her due date neared, but her spirit stayed bright, buoyed by Sebastian's unwavering presence. He'd wheel beside her on walks, his hand in hers, their laughter mingling with the birdsong. The rift with his family remained, a distant ache, but it couldn't dim the joy they'd built. They were a unit now, unshakable, ready for what came next. That next chapter arrived in late April, under a sky streaked with dawn. Amara woke to a sharp pain, her breath catching as she gripped Sebastian's arm. "It's time," she gasped, and his calm facade cracked into action. He called the driver, helped her into the car, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "You've got this," he said, kissing her knuckles as they sped to the hospital, her contractions tightening with every mile. The labor was long, grueling, hours of Amara's strength tested, Sebastian at her side, his encouragement a lifeline. "You're incredible," he murmured, wiping sweat from her brow, his eyes locked on hers as she pushed through the pain. When their son's first cry pierced the room, raw and triumphant, time stopped. The nurse placed the tiny, squirming bundle in Amara's arms, and she laughed through tears, exhausted and elated. "He's here," she whispered, looking at Sebastian. He stared at the boy, dark hair, tiny fists, a face that echoed them both, and felt his world shift. "He's perfect," he said, his voice breaking as he reached out, his hand trembling as it brushed the baby's cheek. They named him Elias, a name they'd chosen weeks ago, meaning promise, a vow fulfilled in his small, fierce presence. The days that followed were a blur of newness. Sleepless nights, soft cries, the mansion alive with the chaos of family. Amara recovered slowly, her strength returning as she cradled Elias, her love for him a quiet fire. Sebastian adapted with a grace that surprised even him, holding his son against his chest, maneuvering his chair with a bottle in hand, his disability no longer a barrier but a detail eclipsed by this greater truth. He'd spent years defining himself by what he'd lost, his legs, his trust. But now, watching Amara nurse Elias, seeing his son's eyes blink up at him, he realized it didn't matter. His family, Amara, Elias, meant everything. One evening, as dusk painted the nursery gold, Sebastian held Elias, rocking gently, Amara leaning against him. "I used to think I was broken," he said, his voice low, reflective. "But you two, you've made me whole." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're whole together." The twist wasn't in the birth itself, but in Sebastian's heart. His disability, once a shadow over his identity, faded into irrelevance. Elias's tiny hand gripped his finger, Amara's warmth pressed against him, and he knew this was his legacy, not the empire, not the wealth, but the love that filled this room. Their bond deepened, a family forged in struggle and triumph, ready for whatever lay ahead. The arrival of Elias wove a new thread into the fabric of Sebastian and Amara's life, stitching together the frayed edges of their past struggles. The nursery became their haven, soft blues and greens, a rocking chair by the window where Amara sang lullabies, Sebastian's low voice joining hers as Elias drifted to sleep. The mansion, once a cold fortress, hummed with warmth, bottles on the counter, toys scattered across the floor, laughter echoing through the halls. They learned parenthood together, nights of shared exhaustion, days of quiet triumphs, each moment deepening the bond they'd fought so hard to build. Sebastian's transformation was subtle but profound. His disability, once a lens through which he viewed every limitation, faded into the background. He'd wheel through the house with Elias in his lap, the boys' giggles lighting up rooms, and feel not the weight of what he couldn't do, but the joy of what he could. Amara watched him bloom, his patience with their son, his fierce love for them both, and felt her own fears dissolve. The doubts about fitting into his world, the insecurities about losing herself, melted away in the face of this reality. They were a family, whole and unbreakable. Spring turned to summer, then autumn again, the seasons marking the growth of their son and their life together. Elias took his first steps, wobbling towards Sebastian's outstretched arms, and Amara cheered, her heart swelling as she captured the moment on her phone. The empire thrived under Sebastian's steady hand, but it was secondary now. His true wealth lay in the quiet evenings with his wife and son, the love that filled their home. One crisp fall evening, as leaves swirled outside, they sat on the back porch, Elias asleep upstairs, the monitor glowing softly beside them. The sky was a canvas of stars, the air cool and still. Amara leaned against Sebastian, her hand in his, the weight of the past a distant memory. She broke the silence, her voice reflective, warm. "We were both lost, you know. Back then, me with my walls, you with yours. But together we found our way." He turned to her, his gray eyes bright with the same love he'd felt that first night she challenged him. "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand. "You pulled me out of the dark. And Elias, he's our light." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Our way wasn't easy, but it's ours." They sat there, wrapped in the peace they'd earned, the doubts and fears that once loomed, now shadows banished by their shared strength. The night stretched on, a quiet promise of more to come, until a soft giggle crackled through the monitor. They exchanged a glance, then went inside, climbing the stairs to the nursery. The final scene unfolded there, Elias, now a toddler, awake and playful, reaching for Sebastian from his crib. Sebastian lifted him, settling the boy in his lap as they rolled across the room, Amara laughing as she joined them. The camera lingered on the trio, Sebastian tossing Elias gently into the air, the child's squeals of delight filling the space, Amara's eyes shining with love. The twist wasn't in an ending, but a beginning. Their son's joy hinted at a future brimming with possibilities, more laughter, more challenges, a life they'd face as they always had, together. As the screen faded to black, their voices lingered, a testament to a love that had overcome all odds, a family forged in the fire of their past, now thriving in the light of their present. What's your take on Sebastian and Amara's journey? Do you believe in second chances in love? Comment below and let's talk about it.